Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me on this morning. I do note the first slide's got an old date on it. We did run a flexible furlough session last week as an ad hoc e-learning session. This has got some amended detail in it, so anybody who's joining us who was on the one last week, there will be some updates for you on there as well. So I apologise for the date being incorrect. Just before we start, any legislation references are actually for GB employment legislation. Any clients who are joining us from those jurisdictions, there is similar things going on. Please do contact the advice service for relevant information for your jurisdiction. My name's Karen Knighton. I'm one of the team leaders here at Peninsula. I'm happy to go through this subject with you. And hoping that it lasts about 30 minutes. Happy to then stay on and answer as many questions as I can. Any questions unable to answer, we will get or we will indicate for you to ring the advice line, and we'll see how far we get with that. We will make sure that we send you a copy of the slides and the recording. If you do give us some time after the event, we'll get those over to you as well. Certainly worth making a note of that 24-hour advice line while we're here on 0844 892 2772. And that's not just to talk about individuals, but certainly is where you would speak about your concerns or any further advice you need on such things as furlough, flexible furlough, etc. But also for any documentation that we can give to assist during this time. Letters, etc., which we do have available, and I will talk to you a bit about letters in regards to flexible furlough. Also worth making a note, and I will get the link sent over to you with the slides in regards to the toolkit that's available through the advice system. And I've got a link that I can send over to you that has some really good guidance notes on it. It's got some policies on there, and we do have additional things that you may find of use if you do want to speak to us about those. So we've got quite a bit to cover. We're going to just quickly, briefly skip over what the job retention scheme is. I think most people are aware of what that is now, but we will go straight into what flexible furlough is and what that now means, who it applies to, the length of flexible furlough, the pay element, paying staff on flexible furlough, government contributions to the scheme, keeping records, really important, working during flexible furlough, a bit of a change in stance from what it was originally, how you calculate working hours, really important when it comes to making those claims, holidays and furlough, and a bit about the furlough navigator you've got open to that should help you with those claims. So just quickly, briefly going over the job retention scheme and furlough. Job retention scheme built around furlough is a scheme that the government have introduced at this time during this period, and they've introduced it to all companies originally not to require people to work, but still be paid 80% of their wage or salary as long as they met the necessary criteria. Important to note that it is completely separate to any layoff or shortage of work contractual right you have. And in its original sense, furlough means no work and no pay. But the scheme that was introduced by the government actually overrides the no pay element and does require employers to pay 80% that they then can recover through the job retention scheme and making those claims with HMRC. So brief view of what it was. But actually what we're concerned with today is what is actually flexible furlough, because our thoughts up until the 1st of July was very straightforward in regards to the fact that they don't work, get 80% and you can claim that back from the government. From the 1st of July though, what it now allows you to do is actually get your staff working, and you can get them working on a part-time basis and still make a claim on furlough through the government. So previously, staff placed on furlough weren't able to do any work for any company or an associated organisation if you wanted to be able to claim that 80%. And it was capped at £2,500 per month, and that was to do with their wages and the claims from the government. What flexible furlough means is that you can now get them working part-time, and the company can still make a claim through furlough for the rest of the period of time where they are not working. And it means employers will still be able to claim that furlough grant for the hours their flexibly furloughed employees do not work compared to the hours they would normally have worked in that period. So your employees don't lose out, but what you can do is get them back into work in some capacity for some hours. So who does the scheme actually apply to? From the 1st of July 2020, only employees in relation to whom the employer has previously successfully claimed a grant for are eligible for more grants under the scheme. So you would have had to have put a claim in for that individual for them to be able to have more grants under the scheme. We'll come on to some exemptions of that in a minute. So only staff previously furloughed, and actually, although it says from the 10th of July, because you had a criteria of 3 minimum weeks prior to that, you would have to have actually had them furloughed by the 10th of June to be able to put your 3-week criteria in, are eligible to be furloughed going forward with no new staff being able to join the scheme. There are some exemptions, we'll go through it. So it means that they must have previously been furloughed for at least 3 consecutive weeks, taking place any time between the 1st of March and the 30th of June. For the minimum of 3-week period to be completed by the 30th of June, the last day an employee could have started furlough for the first time was the 10th of June. So just bear that in mind, it's the first time. You've just got to be able to show that they've already had a claim, successful claim, up until the July. Did say there was some exemptions, and there are some exemptions. And those exemptions is that the 10th of June cut-off period does not apply to staff returning from family leave or reservists returning from active service who can be furloughed even if they have not been furloughed before and the employer successfully claimed for other employees before. This is to stop them from being unfairly treated due to their right to their leave. So just bear in mind that. So as long as you've made a claim for anybody before, then anybody returning on family-friendly rights to leave and military reservists can actually be put through even if they're brand new and even if they've not been on furlough before. But you must have used the scheme to start with, so you can't start the scheme as a fresh. It also applies to those employees who transfer under a TUPE scheme after the 10th of June. They can then be furloughed for the first time by the transferee, but only where they've been furloughed by the transferor for a minimum of 3-week periods between the 1st of March and the 30th of June. So with that, what we do need to do and make sure is that you've got the relevant information and evidence in regards to any claims made by any transferring employees, so you can show that they were furloughed previously and now you can then furlough them again under the scheme. There's a maximum limit to the number of employees can be furloughed from the 1st of June, and it applies. It cannot be more than the maximum number furloughed in any claim period ending by the 30th of June. So there's a good example there. An employer has previously submitted 3 claims between 1st of March and 30th of June, in which the total number of employees furloughed in each of those respective 3 claims was 30, 20 and 50 employees. That means the maximum number of employees that the employer can furlough in any single claim starting on or after the 1st of July would be 50. That 50 potentially won't include your family friendly and reservists, because they're potentially on top of that. It's 50 of your people who've been on furlough before, but do just check that with the advice line before you start looking at putting your claims in. So, length of flexible furlough. Flexible furlough agreements can last any amount of time, and it means that you're not now subjected to a minimum of 3 weeks. However, regardless of what you are claiming for, the period that you as an employer can sit in front of your computer and process a claim into HMRC has got to be a minimum period of 7 calendar days. So you can't do it more frequently. So you can't put one in today and then in 2 days' time put another claim in. It's got to be a minimum of 7 days. But that is for your claim into HMRC, not what you're claiming for. So there is no minimum restrictions now on any amount of time you don't have to have. There's no need to have that minimum of 3 weeks anymore. But you do need to bear in mind how often you're going to put your claim into HMRC. It's got to be a minimum period of 7 days, and it's got to be no more than 4 claims in a month. So just think about how you're going to do it. Employees can enter into a flexible furlough agreement more than once. So again, full flexibility with regards to it. You may have a period of time where they come back into work and then you place them back on flexible furlough because they're going back onto part-time hours. Absolutely fine. And just to confirm, full furlough going forward, which had to be the case previously, also doesn't have to be for 3 weeks long from the 1st of July. However, an employee furloughed on the 25th of June would still have had to have served those 3 weeks on furlough for the employer to make the claim through the system. So it's any furlough starting before 1st of July must still have the 3 weeks. Then moving forward, that 3 weeks doesn't apply anymore. Same premise as before with regards to how this works. Employers need to pay furloughed employees at least 80% of their usual monthly earnings up to a maximum of £2,500. The government then reimburses employers through the scheme, including providing employer contributions to national insurance and pension. Employers claimed for a minimum of 3 weeks and were able to choose to pay employees more than the grant, but they didn't have to. Employees still paid their income tax, national insurance contributions, and any other deductions from wages. And the pay arrangements are going to change in regards to that flexible furlough. So anyone who's already started this will be aware that from the 1st of July, employers will pay the employee for the hours they actually work. So as usual, you pay them for the hours they actually work, along with national insurance contributions and pension contributions for those hours. The scheme will then allow employers to recover the remainder of wages to a maximum cap. Wage caps are proportional to the hours an employee is furloughed, and there's an example there. An employee is entitled to 60% of the £2,500 cap if they're placed on furlough for 60% of their usual hours. So by the end of it, they're still getting the required minimum furlough there. There's no change on the level of assistance for periods covering June and July, but from the start of August, employers will be able to pay the national insurance contributions, or will have to pay, sorry, the national insurance contributions and the employer's pension contributions, which comes to about 5% of a total wage cost in average claims. But that's not what you go off. You don't go off the percentage, you just go off the requirement in regards to the national insurance as usual. It then changes again from the start of September, where employers will have to contribute 10% towards the 80% of furloughed employees, up to a cap of 2,500 plus national insurance and pension contributions, and the scheme will fund 70% of wages with a cap of £2,187.50. So they're gradually moving it away from the 80% to the national insurance contributions and pension contributions to be paid by the employer, then 70% paid by the scheme, and the employer will have to pay 10%. And then from the start of August, employers will have to contribute 20% towards the 80% of furloughed employees, up to the cap of 2,500, plus NI and pension contributions. And the scheme will fund 60% of wages up to the cap of 1,875. The scheme will close as it stands at the end of October. So just bear in mind, there's 2 elements to flexible furlough. There's the first element of your ability to get them in part-time, and then those hours where they're not working, be able to claim through flexible furlough within these provisions now, though, in regards to August, September and October. So just be aware it is going to change moving forward in regards to how much you can claim back from the government and how much you as the employer has to contribute to the times when they're on furlough. Claims can now be made under that new scheme. And when claiming for employees who are flexibly furloughed, employers should not claim unless they're sure of the exact number of hours they have worked during that claim period. And it means that employers should claim when they have certainty about the number of hours their employees are working during the claim period. If employers claim in advance and their employees work for more hours than they have told HMRC about, then they will have to pay some of the grant back to HMRC. So just be aware of that. And there is an ability to correct overpayments in the next claim period. And there is an ability now to declare if there has been an overpayment at some period of time, just due to the chopping and changing in regards to people being available, etc. So just be aware of that as well. Just a reminder that this is the same as it was when on full furlough, but pay when on furlough does not have to meet the national minimum wage or the national living wage, because these rates are only payable for hours actually worked. Obviously, any furloughed employees who return part-time will need to be paid their usual rate by the employer in line with the contract, and it must not dip below the current national minimum wage, national living wage for the time that they are actually working. But your actual furlough period where they're not working, because they're not working, national minimum wage and national living wage doesn't come into it. Really important because of obviously the HMRC activity to keep records of how many hours your employees work and the number of hours they're furloughed during flexible furlough, sorry. So for example, their employers will need to record that an employee normally works for 37 hours a week is actually working for 15 and is furloughed for 22, because that will then marry with the claims that you're making through HMRC. And in any case of an audit, you can actually showcase the records there to back up your claims. During flexible furlough, employees are not allowed to do any work for employers or any linked associated organisations during the periods that are recorded as being on furlough. So they can do the work for the part-time hours of it, you pay them for that, and then there's a furlough part of it that you can claim back in line with the caps moving forward, but they cannot be working for you during that furlough period. They can still do training during the hours that they are recorded as being on furlough, but they must be paid at least the national minimum wage for those hours for training. So just be aware of that as well. So a lot of questions about what happens during annual leave and furlough happened right at the beginning of the process, and stances changed as the government had a relook at it, and it was something they were always going to revisit at some point in time. At the moment, annual leave will accrue as normal during any period of furlough or flexible furlough. They are still employed. So as they are still employed, they continue to accrue their normal annual leave. When an employee takes annual leave during flexible furlough, the hours of annual leave should be counted as furloughed hours and not working hours. So this is so you can put your claim in for the furloughed hours against the annual leave, because they can actually be on annual leave whilst on furlough. So just make sure that any hours annual leave taken during the flexible furlough, the hours are counted as furloughed hours and not working hours. This applies even if the annual leave falls in hours that the employee would have been working in the part-time arrangement. So it's just giving you that ability to make the claim for any annual leave hours as furlough hours, okay? And you can claim to the scheme for those hours of annual leave. An employer should not put someone on furlough just because they are on annual leave for that period. So that final point means that someone who's not intended as being on furlough, so someone who's back in work and all is fine, then decides to take 2 weeks on annual leave, you shouldn't then agree that that person is on furlough so that you can claim back the relevant percentage of that wage. But if they are on flexible furlough, for example, you're now working Monday to Wednesday and then furloughed Thursday, Friday, and they take a week's leave, you convert the Monday, Wednesday into furlough so that they're furloughed for the whole week. But you shouldn't move them onto that if they're not already on furlough or flexible furlough. So calculating hours of work. If an employee is flexibly furloughed, employers need to work out their employees' usual hours and record the actual hours they work as well as their furloughed hours for that claim period. There are two different calculations they can use to work out their employees' usual hours, and depending on whether they work fixed or variable hours. Employers should work out usual hours of work for employees who work variable hours if either their employee is not contracted to a fixed number of hours or their employee's pay depends on the number of hours they actually work. So there's a variance in what they potentially could earn depending on the hours they actually work. Where the employee's working hours are fixed or their pay does not vary with the amount of hours worked, so a salaried employee gets the same every month regardless, the reference period for calculating their hours is the hours they were contracted for at the end of the last pay period ending on or before the 19th of March 2020. So that's the date you have a look at. So it's the last pay period ending on or before 19th of March 2020. And that's the calculation that you use in regards to their hours. So it's a set period of time. Where you have people who work variable hours, sorry, what you need to do is do two calculations and use the higher of those. So the two calculations is the average number of hours worked in the tax year 2019 to 2020. Average number of hours in that whole tax year is one calculation. Or you have a look at the corresponding calendar period in the tax year 19 or 20. So if you're putting in a claim in August, you look at the corresponding calendar period of August in your tax year 19 to 20, and you have a look at what those hours were. You then use the higher of those two. And that's because their pay varies. What's a normal month? What's a normal set of hours of work? You just need to do that calculation. So if you have got someone on fixed hours or the pay doesn't vary, you use that one point in time, the end of the last pay period ending on or before the 19th of March. If you've got anyone whose hours are variable or their pay varies depending, then you have to do those two calculations and you use the higher of either one of them. With all of that, really strongly recommend you do keep all that calculation very clear. So if you do have someone come in having a look, you can very clearly show how you've reached your hours of work there. Now, something that did come up with flexible working is about claiming for flexible furlough, is about claiming for notice pay. Now, this Treasury direction came out on the 26th of June, so only really recently within the last week. And the latest Treasury direction relating to the scheme has created confusion about claims to the scheme for wages paid during notice period. The direction now says, integral to the purpose of the CJRS is that the amounts paid to an employer pursuant to the claim are used by the employer to continue the employment of employees. Are notice payments used to continue the employment of employees? The government guidance says employees can still be made redundant when on furlough. So it kind of contradicts itself. This actually gives you two options in how you move forward, because the government direction and the Treasury direction is not very clear. You either continue to make the claim, but be aware that it may be classed as an overclaim, which needs to be paid back. So this is if you make a claim for notice pay. So you continue to make the claim, but be aware you may be asked to pay it back if it's classed as an overclaim. Or you don't make the claim and put potentially unnecessary extra pressure on your company finances. Now, until clarification is brought forward, it'll be very difficult for employers to actually know what to do, unfortunately. So those are your two options. Which do you want to do? One of them potentially means you might have to pay it back anyway. One of them potentially means you're footing the bill when you might not need to. So at the moment, it's difficult to know. Obviously, as soon as we get any clarification on that, we will make sure that you are made aware of that. So the portal's been made available to make claims from the 20th of April. Those who are familiar with the portal will probably understand a bit more about this going forward. But from July, there are some changes that came into place from July in regards to how you put those claims through. You could at one point put claims through cross-calendar months because a lot of people were doing it in the 3-week blocks. That was required. You cannot do that anymore. So you cannot make claims that cross calendar months. You must ensure that any claims that relate to June are made by the end of July. You will need to submit a claim for the period up to and included the 30th of June, and then another claim period from the 1st of July 2020 onwards. So it looks like there's a bit of an error in there. So anything that relates to June needs to be made by the end of June, not July. And then anything from the 1st of July onwards, you would then make in July. The minimum claim period is 7 days. That's you physically sat there putting the claim into HMRC. And you can only claim for a period of fewer than 7 days if the claim period includes either the first day or the last day of the calendar month and you've already claimed for the period ending immediately before it. So there is a little bit leeway of the first and last day. But other than that, you have to put it in a minimum 7-day blocks, and it has to be in the month that you're claiming for. I'll make sure that slide gets amended before I send it over to you. There is a step-by-step guide on the job retention scheme available from the government online. It's certainly worth a read before, if you've never put a claim in, certainly worth a read before you put your claim in. You'll need your government gateway ID to log in. Claims currently being processed within 6 days. And the portal now allows you to notify of any overclaims in previous months. Corresponding amounts will then be deducted from that current claim. So you have got a chance to correct any overclaims. HMRC have now allowed you to do that. And if you find you have overclaimed and you do not intend to make any further claims where that can be corrected, you should contact HMRC to get that corrected as well. So they are giving you that option to correct anything that's happened by circumstance in regards to claiming. If you do use Bright, it's certainly worth looking at our Back to Work Navigator and the Furlough Navigator. It certainly does help you with your claims to HMRC, allows you to save information like your claim reference numbers, but your Back to Work Navigator also looks at everything that you need in regards to getting people back into a working environment who potentially were working from home or on furlough. Your Furlough Navigator allows you to log your furlough correctly, run reports, and helps you with your HMRC claim. If anybody does have Bright and wants a demonstration on that, please do let me know. Anybody who doesn't have Bright and wants any further information, please also let me know, and I can certainly get some information over to you. So just in summary, just to make sure that you are aware of all the requirements there, please do give the advice line a ring if there's anything that's a sticking point for you. And I know it's things like, how do I work out the hours of work? How do I work out the pay, etc. Please do ring the advice line with the information. It's a lot easier when there's information at hand for us to be able to advise you on your specific circumstance. I did mention about documentation. If you are bringing someone or putting someone on flexible furlough who was on full furlough before, we are likely to have provided you with the letters for full furlough. You will need to give them another letter again, because the change has changed, if you see what I mean. So before, you would have put an agreement would have been reached to place them on full furlough. What you're now doing is agreeing to allow them to work part-time and be able to be put on the flexible furlough, which is different. It's a different agreement, but we have all that documentation available for you. So if you do need to now start moving people from full furlough or full-time work into flexible furlough, if a claim's been made previously, then please let us know and we can get that letter, those letters over to you for issue and use. Certainly worth making sure you've got that Peninsula Advice app downloaded. We're sending a lot of push notifications in regards to everything that's going on with things like flexible furlough. You can have a look at your recent advice as well if you just want a recap on what was said, etc. Call from there, and you've got access to certain documentation over there as well. And we are doing a live Q&A session every Tuesday and Thursday. You can jump on it after here if you want. With our employment law expert, Kate Palmer. Flexible furlough is certainly something that she has been discussing on there. So you can pose your questions there if you need to. And if you just follow the page at Peninsula UK, sometimes it's worth listening to other people's questions. It might be something you've not even thought about, but certainly worth having a look at this moment in time. Okay, thank you very much for joining. I know I appreciate there's quite a lot to get in there. We will get those slides over to you. Don't expect you to be jotting down all the information on there as well. What I will do is quickly go through some questions. It's quite unnerving when I click on the questions, my face just suddenly appears through the webcam. So let me have a look if I can answer majority of these questions. Anybody who needs to leave, then please do so and we'll get those slides over to you. But anyone who wishes to stay, you're more than welcome to do so. A question here, I hope I did answer, about a minimum time period of furlough. There isn't now. The only time period you need to be aware of is the time period of making the actual claim. So from the 1st of July, for anyone who's on full or flexible furlough, you've not got that 3-week minimum criteria anymore to make your claim. But when you're sat making your claim to HMRC, you can't do it more frequently than 7 days, 4 times in a month. So just bear that in mind. You might make you decide when you're going to be putting your claims in, also to be able to be capturing the claims for all your month period, so July, August, September, claims to be made within that month. Yes, absolutely. Flexible furlough is an option. If you need to keep people on full furlough, that is still available. All that's happening with flexible furlough is, as things are shifting and changing with lockdown easing, and various other businesses now able to operate, and people being able to go back into workplaces as well. What it means is that you may be able to get people to work, but you actually might not have enough to get them into work full time. It just gives you that option and flexibility, but you can still have people on full furlough. Question here about people who are returning from their statutory maternity pay, their leave. So obviously, anyone on a family friendly, they have a right to time off under the maternity, paternity, shared parental leave premise. We don't want to be denying people their right to leave. If you've got no work, and then you are looking at potentially utilising the furlough scheme for them the same as everybody else. What I would want to make sure is that there's no discrimination, so that if they are going on furlough, you've got others on furlough doing the same job as them as well, and they're not just being sidelined or just them. And if that's the case, ring our advice line first. But yeah, and statutory maternity leave is one of those where they wouldn't have had to have been on furlough previously, because they couldn't have been, because they were on maternity leave. But you then can actually add them to the furlough moving forward. So a question here about the maximum figure. Someone said, well, if surely it would never be more. Well, the claims for furlough have changed through time as more people have been placed on furlough. So some businesses just wouldn't have put the whole of their business on furlough. They might have had some people still operating, but actually now have a need to place on furlough, or bring people back part-time. And it might be you actually then think about putting more people on flexible furlough than you had on furlough before. So that's why the numbers can't exceed any number that you have actually claimed for employee wise in any given claim previously, apart from those that are returning from family friendly and reservists, etc. Good question here about, can you have employees coming back to work full time for a period, specific project, and then place them back on furlough? Yes, as long as they've been furloughed before. So the premise there is no new furloughs unless they are coming back off family friendly, reservists, TUPE. Even with TUPE though, you need evidence that they were furloughed prior to the transfer taking place. But yeah, I mean, there's no indication that you have to have them on some element of furlough. You have now got the option to be able to full furlough, flexible furlough, bring them back in work, put them back on flexible furlough. Just make sure that your communication and letters are all in line with that you are actually recording it correctly, and then it aligns itself to your claim. But yeah, there's flexibility in regards to what you do moving forward. So again, the 7 days isn't about what you're claiming. That's separate. There's no minimum requirement now of what you're claiming flexible wise. So before, you had to have 3 weeks before you could put a claim in for an individual. They had to be on furlough for 3 weeks. That's not the case anymore. The 7 days is about you physically putting your claim into HMRC. So you can't put anything in more frequently than in 7-day periods, apart from that 1 day on either side as indicated, and you can only put 4 claims in per month. But your claim could amount to anything furlough wise within your month. So it's just a case of deciding how often you want to put your claim into HMRC. What you're then claiming just has to fall in line with the furlough requirements. There's someone saying about the issue of mid-month claims in advance because you don't actually know what they're going to be working for the final period of your month. I would imagine is the case. It may be then that you actually have a claim set aside for the last working day of the month where you actually know what people are working, and then you can put in that claim at the end of the month in line with the month requirement. If you do need further advice on that, please give our advice line a ring. Um, Question here about, are employers obliged to full pay for hours worked? Yes. So you've got a contract in place. That means if they actually undertake any work, they should be paid in line with their contract, and it has to be at least the national minimum wage. Anybody on furlough doesn't have to meet the national minimum wage, and it's 80%. If you choose to top that up to 100%, that's your choice, but you don't have to. But any actual work needs to be in line with their contracts of employment and at least the national minimum or living wage. So yes, good question. Where you've had furlough employees, they've been accruing leave during this time. If they now take a period of annual leave, can you claim the furlough payment while they're on leave? Yes, you can. They can be on annual leave whilst on furlough, and you can claim the 80%. If you need to top it up, but that's up to you then to pay the additional. You can still only claim that 80% from the government. And if you're classing it as holiday, because it's a holiday, they are entitled to their full pay for that. So a question there about notice pay of people being made redundant. I did cover that in the last slide. It's unsure, basically. They've contradicted themselves. They said you can still go through redundancies. What they're saying is that the furlough payments are there to try and ensure people remain employed. But obviously, if someone's working their notice, they're not going to be remaining employed. So the two options were you make the claim through the furlough scheme, but at some point you might be asked to pay it back as an overpayment, or you take that cost yourselves with the potential that you didn't need to because it could have been covered by the furlough scheme. The government just haven't been clear, unfortunately. As we get more information, we'll let you know. Question here about flexible furlough needs of the business. Yeah, that's exactly what it needs to be. There is no minimum. So if you need them an hour and then they go back on furlough, that's what happens through agreement, which is why if you're going to do that, please do make sure you get the relevant letters from the advice line. They'll be happy to supply that with you, but that means that everybody has agreed what's going to happen. Good question about obviously declaring overpayment, which HMRC are going to be very keen on you doing to make sure these payments are correct. But what if you have underclaimed in the first few weeks of the scheme? I've not heard anything about anyone being successful in kind of backdating and getting an additional claim through. It's certainly worth making a call to HMRC to see what they have to say. But usually once you've done your claim period, I know especially at the beginning with full furlough, once you put your claim period in, that was it was in, and there was no kind of leeway on that. Obviously they're now allowing you to put through over claims. Good question about 0 hours holidays accrual. It should be what their normal working hours would be. So you'd have to do a calculation. I mean, at the moment with 0 hours holidays, you'd go back 52 weeks anyway to work out what an average day would be for pay. But when it comes to accrual, it would be reasonable that it's based on a normal day's work, not because furlough they're not working. So it would have to be based on that. Give our advice line a ring in regards to help, and we can look at potential calculations. So again, with notice periods, if they're on notice period and they're on furlough, then it's the 80%. You can top it up to 100% if you want. The question is whether that would class as a furlough payment, which is something you can potentially try and do with the risk of it being requested to be paid back. So, question here about annual leave. Annual leave is a right and it should be based on their normal hours of work. So, they will continue to accrue their normal holidays throughout this process because they are still employed. You wouldn't change it to the 80% because the 80% is just a claim on furlough. And if anybody is on holiday and you class them as holiday, they're entitled to 100%, but you can still use the furlough scheme to claim the 80% if that makes sense. Anybody who's asked me to get some information about the navigators, if you're already a Bright client, I'll make sure that we do that for you. Good question about what if you don't know what you need someone for. So different hours each week, depending. It's flexible. Certainly worth ringing our advice line to know how we would word that in the letter. So do so. But yeah, I mean, the idea of this is it's fully flexible and your claim is based on hours actually worked and then furlough hours actually furloughed, depending on what's happened in the previous weeks, whatever it is. And you can do that. There's been no reference to how that happens. There's no reference to minimals. There's no reference to they have to come in half of their week. Part-time can be anything less than being in for your full-time hours. So good question again about working for other organisations. So of course, if you're claiming furlough, any time that they are on furlough, whether that's full furlough or flexible furlough, because you've got them working part-time, they cannot be undertaking any work for you or an associated organisation. If you're asking them to do any training, then they have to be paid full. If they have got a completely separate job, so if someone works here for Peninsula and they decided to have a weekend job where they are working in a bar, completely unassociated, they're not working for an associated organisation, then what happens with that separate employer is entirely up to that arrangement, whether they carry on working there or whether they themselves place them on furlough. So you could have people being on furlough for more than one job. Now the issue becomes a bit blurry and muddy. If they're on furlough for you, they work Monday to Friday 9 till 5, and then they get another job with someone else Monday to Wednesday 9 till 5. Now they should still be available for you. For one, they're still under a contract of employment. They should still be available. So if you were to ring up, you try and give them as much notice as possible. You might need them back tomorrow. They need to be available. So that's a potential issue. The other issue is they're not likely to tell you, because they can potentially claim furlough for you and be claiming a wage. Now that goes against the grain of what furlough is, but it is likely to be happening because how else would you know? Now, whether HMRC then will come down on them at some point in time and say you had no right going getting a job whilst getting 80% of your earnings from an employer, we don't know. We don't know how that would then, turn out or how that will happen. With regards to how you communicate the time of periods that they're going to be working against the time of periods that are furlough, please ring our advice line. To get on the Q&A, so someone's just asked me to run through that again. If you go to Facebook and you follow our page, which is at Peninsula UK, you'll have access to that live feed at 12 o'clock. It's between 12 and 1, and you'll have access to the questions that are being asked and the answers to it, and you can pose your questions through typing in that live Q&A session. So hopefully you find that of use. So yeah, flexible furloughing, just to confirm that you need to be claiming in the month of the furlough. So there's no kind of overlapping of months anymore. They are encouraging you to claim for all of July in July, by the end of July, all of August by the end of August. Minimum 7 days in your claim, no more than 4 a month. So how you are going to decide how you put your claim into HMRC to ensure that that happens. There is just that beginning and end one day that might need to have a separate claim made, and it might mean that you're doing it more frequently than the 7 days, if you see what I mean. But that's just to take into account where you've got odd days that don't fall into a week, etc. So you have got an ability to do that. I think I've answered the question about returning from maternity. I'm just looking to see if there's any new questions. I won't be a second. Actually, quite a good question. What about the staff who've been working full time, and due to the amount of staff working full time, they've not been able to take leave, and now furloughed workers can take theirs? This is about how you manage this. So you may decide that you will get some of your furlough staff back to allow some of the staff who've been working since March full time, not being able to have annual leave, to now go on annual leave. What you don't want to have is an us and them mentality with this. People on furlough probably didn't ask to be put on furlough. This is all about keeping business going, keeping everybody in jobs. And I think that's just worth a reminder sometimes. You certainly don't want that divide. What you want to do is manage your holidays as you always would, so everybody gets what they want where they can. I understand that's not always possible. So what you might want to do is encourage people to just carry on booking their holidays as normal, and hopefully be able to accommodate everybody. What you can do this year though, so usually with your holidays, you've got your 5.6 working weeks minimum. What you could always do is allow 1.6 of those weeks to be carried forward to the next holiday year, but they had to be used in the next holiday year. They've actually extended that now and are allowing you, for those people who couldn't take holidays this holiday year due to COVID-19, they're allowing you to carry forward the 4 weeks that is left over the next 2 years. Now, bear in mind, you know, the benefits of holidays, it's a health and safety thing, etc. But there's a recognition that this is going to have an impact, isn't it? And what you can't have is everybody being on holiday for the last 3 months of the holiday year. It might be your busiest time. You might not be allowed to. Again, just bear in mind the health and safety element there of people having the necessary rest and breaks. But you have now got options with regards to allowing people to carry forward holidays over the next 2 years that they weren't able to take due to COVID-19. What you want to be clear to your employees is whether you're going to be taking that on board or not. It may be that doesn't help you because you only have the same situation next year. So what you want to do is encourage staff to be using their holidays now. There is an element of being able to enforce holidays. Ideally, you come to some agreement, but if you do need to enforce holidays, you do need to give twice as much notice as the holiday itself. So for every 1 week, it's 2 weeks notice. If you haven't got 2 weeks, break it down. For every 1 day, it's 2 days notice. But just think about being consistent and fair across the board. So bank holidays, do bank holidays count as annual leave with regards to flexible furlough? If you class them as a holiday, then yes. With bank holidays, you've got an option. You can either top it up at the time the bank holiday occurs and pay them 100% for that day, and it's still a holiday then, and you can claim the 80% off furlough, or you just pay the 80% of furlough, but you need to allow them to have that day back again if it forms part of their contractual holiday entitlement. So you either class it as a holiday or not, pay them the 100% depending on whether it is. Just make sure they're always getting their contractual and at least the statutory minimum of 5.6 working weeks holiday. So yeah, to clarify, someone working 3 days a week, furloughed for 2 days a week, then takes a whole week annual leave, and that's what they're doing consistently moving forward. You're not placing them on furlough just for the holiday. Then you can mark that whole week as furlough and claim the 80% at the moment, or the reduced amount as we go forward. A link as to how you do the calculations for an employee on flexible furlough. If you do go on HMRC, I do believe it's got quite good step-by-step instructions on what you need to do. If you do have any difficulties with that, please do give us a ring. Um, Good question here about whether we need to be ringing people and informing them about changes. It depends on the setup. Ideally, you'd have a conversation. You've been kept, hopefully keeping in touch with your furlough people anyway, just to give them a bit of reassurance, what's happening, what's likely to happen. The letter is actually aligned to say that this is as agreed. Ideally, you'd have the conversation and then the letter backs up what's been agreed. But you'll need to tell them about the change anyway, because they're moving from something to something else. And if it's moving from full furlough to flexible furlough, you're getting them in for some hours, so you need to be having those conversations. So part-time when it comes to flexible furlough is anything that's not full furlough. So if you're bringing them back in for any period of time to work, that's what's going to be classed as flexible furlough for what you are able to put your claims through. I think I've covered the 7 days. The 7 days is about you physically putting your claim through, not how many days they've actually been on flexible furlough for. Again, holiday pay should be their normal pay, not their furlough pay. Yes, if you've already furloughed somebody during the previous period, and you bring them back full time to work on a project, and then within the period up to the end of October, you need to place them on part-time flexible furlough, then you can do so as long as they've had a claim against them previously, unless they're on family friendly or reservist or TUPE. Interesting question. Can you enforce staff on furlough to take annual leave, but not for staff still working? Potentially, yeah, you can. Now, how you do that is up to you, but having the conversation that, look, you're on furlough, you've got all this holiday accrual, you're currently not working, you're getting paid at least 80%. I want you to take X amount of annual leave and give them notice of that, then potentially yes. The argument is, those still working are working, and you coming back with full entitlement, the same as them. Let's work together to make this fair. Who you decides needs to be on furlough and who doesn't is it's a business decision. There's no right to furlough, so no one can demand to be on furlough. Obviously, you've got the issue with regards to shielding, in regards to placing them on furlough, but that's coming to an end at the end of July. And provisions in place throughout the month. So who needs to be on furlough depends on your business need. As long as anybody who's classed as furlough is not actually doing any work to be able to make your claim. You can potentially say to them, I need you 3 days a week moving forward, but I will confirm that on a week by week basis, depending on when the business comes in, and just confirm that in writing. Just make sure you then keep the records of when they've actually worked. This is where Bright really does come in handy, because you can actually put in their furlough time and their work time, and that backs up any claim that you then make. good question. Why would someone take annual leave while on furlough? They're not working anyway. Because I've had this where at any time I could have rang them up and said, I need you from next week. And if they want a booked holiday, if they're literally going away, they should still be booking it as holiday. If they are not available for work, it is still holiday. I agree. They are not likely to tell you. I've had a few honest people saying, I'm not available, I'm booking this as holiday. But then that might be why you encourage them or enforce holiday on them, in order to make sure they are taking an element holiday whilst they're on furlough, so that they're not coming back with a full entitlement. Certainly worth a call to our advice line to discuss. Yes, I agree, they're not likely to tell you, but it becomes apparent when you ring them up and say, I need you from whatever date, and they say, I'm not available, that is then a holiday. Yes, people can be annual leave on furlough, or on annual leave during furlough. You pay the 80%, you have to top up to 20%, but you can claim the 80% still. So the question is, can you confirm that an employee has to be on furlough for 3 weeks before transferring flexible furlough? No. The 3 weeks was prior to the 1st of July, and that still had to happen before the 1st of July hit for any claims there. Moving forward, there is no 3-week minimum, but what you do have to do is make sure somebody's already had a claim put through to be able to claim again. Question here about changing terms and conditions midway through here. If you've ever had an agreement to change terms and conditions so their hours change, or you've gone through a full consultation process with notice and it's changed anyway, then anything you do furlough wise will be in line with their contracted hours. And if that's changed for whatever reason, that's what you base it on. Do ring our advice line about that and confirm, just to make sure that the procedure and everything was correct. And yes, you can vary the hours worked each week. It's about what work you've got available. It's potentially about being fair, so everybody gets a chance to be working and on furlough. So however you want to do that, however that rota, if you like, ends up, is absolutely fine. There's been so far, there's not been any indication that it has to fit a certain criteria. Yes, just to confirm again, we'll be recording the session, including the questions and answers and the slides, and we'll get all that sent over to you. Question here about self-employed individuals. The furlough scheme's only extended to employees who have a contract of employment with hours. It's certainly self-employed because they're a business in their own right, and there's no guaranteed hours, there's no contractual hours. I think there's a separate thing that they would need to have a look at, whether they can gain anything from the government through a business in their own right. Question here about making redundancies and the cost to that. Furlough is only likely to help if it can help at all, because there's no guarantee with this just yet. During your notice pay that you have to give the redundancy, the actual redundancy cost itself would still have to be borne. That doesn't touch furlough. And just bear in mind that if you do chance using furlough during any kind of notice period, that there might be a time at some point in time that you're asked to pay that back, but we just don't know. We just don't know at this moment in time, unfortunately. I'll make sure the link for the tool kit is on the slides that we send over to you. The advice line number is 0844 892 2772, and it will be on the slides that I send over to you. Just to confirm, someone's asked me to confirm about bank holidays. The option with bank holidays is if they form part of your contract on a normal holiday off, there's two options. You either top it up to 100% or with in regards to where it is, and it can still be classed as a holiday that they've taken. Or you only pay the 80% or whatever it is as we move forward, but you need to be looking at giving them that holiday back because they've technically not had the holiday then, especially if it forms part of the statutory minimum, but it's likely to also form part of the contract as well. Good question here about cancellation of holidays. Someone who's booked 2 weeks off in the future is now asking to cancel it. This is entirely up to you. If it works better for you to turn around and tell everybody they need to honor holidays, because a lot of people will be doing this because holidays have actually themselves been cancelled. But then if your holiday year is January to December, you've got very limited time for everybody then to try and fit it in. And is the situation going to change that much that all of a sudden the current situation has changed enough for them to want to take their holidays, if that makes sense? So that's a decision you need to make. Just be consistent with it across the board. If you're going to say, actually, no, we're not allowing cancellation of holidays because we need you to take your holidays, then that's absolutely fine. Just make sure the message has gone to everybody, and just refuse to cancel the holidays. It may, in some cases, work better that they do cancel the holidays, and people take advantage of the ability to allow yourselves to carry forward 4 weeks of the holiday year for the next 2 years. Yes, they can come in for 1 day and furlough for 4. Yes, it can be part days. There's been no indication that there is a format in regards to what it is. All you need to be sure of is that you're very clear on the hours they've actually worked and the hours that are furloughed. That's what needs to be. It's not interested, or it doesn't say, does this mean they worked on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on their 20 hours. It just says in a week where they usually work 37.5 hours, those 37.5 hours, how much did they actually work? So you need to pay them. How much is actually furlough that you can then claim the equivalent for? Yeah, so the question about notice, about resignation, yeah, the same premise. We just don't know what they're going to class notice period of, because of the whole point of furlough is to keep people in a job. That's the whole point of it, is to carry on employment. And obviously, if you're working notice, it's coming to an end. So whether at some point they're going to say, actually, you couldn't make claims for anybody in notice provisions, pay it back, but then they might not. And therefore, if you've paid it, you've missed out on an option of being able to claim it. It's giving you the options and deciding. If you do it through the claim for the HMRC, though, just make sure you've got that money set aside just in case at some point you have to pay that back. Sorry. So if an employer wants someone to cancel their holiday, then if that's the case and you want let me just read the rest of your question. Okay, so yes, technically you as an employer can cancel their holidays. You need to be aware of, again, giving notice, twice as much notice as the holiday itself in order to do so. What you also need to bear in mind is cost to that. If you're asking them to cancel their holiday and there is a cost associated with that cancellation, then who bears the brunt of that cost? Because it's you asking them. Ideally, this should be a last resort, you forcing a cancellation. Ring the advice line and talk about the specific situation, especially if other people are still having their holidays. What you want to do is just avoid any unrest at the moment and unease of this. Holidays are a very emotive subject for a lot of people. And depending on what's happened leading up to that, depends on whether they feel it's necessary. So do please ring our advice line before you go around cancelling people's holidays, please. The furlough scheme is based on people who are employed, who are getting employed pay. they're the only ones who you can actually claim for. Any queries about directors, etc., please do ring the advice line. We've actually reached the end of those questions. I do hope you found those useful. Just to recap, I'm going to send over the slides, the recording, the link to the toolkit, and anybody who's asked me for information about the Bright Furlough and Back to Work Navigator, if you're already with Bright, I'll get someone to organise a demo for you so you can see exactly how you can be utilising that at the moment. If you do leave all of that with me, if there is any specific questions I've missed, I apologise. If there is anything, I'll do a report when I go back, and I'll make sure we get someone giving you a call in regards to your specific circumstance. If you still need to speak to someone, do give that advice line a call, 0844 892 2772. Thank you very much for your time today.